Good morning, good day, beautiful people who are seeking ancient awakening through finding the spiritual implications within mythology. We are back with the regular scheduled programming after I took a bit of a sabbatical type of break from what I was doing before due to just sitting and having to deal with and process my diabetes. So this diagnosis, which I just spoke about a few days ago on my main sort of channel for things, the realm of inspiration, which is linked to this video, that video where I kind of just talked about how I've been feeling, if you were interested to see and understand and know. So as of recording this 3 weeks ago, I did the episode about Persephone, so that was episode 22. So what did I decide this episode would be? I actually don't know, so I'm gonna play it back. Because I couldn't decide.
Everything is interesting to me. What is the spiritual implication of the Gorgon? What does the Gorgon represent? I say the Gorgon is the lower self and what rises from the lower self, being the Pegasus implications of the Gorgon.
So spiritual implications of the Gorgon is what we are doing. Now I want to do this completely just like what's coming to my mind, talk about it. I don't really have necessarily something scripted out. I am going to pull from my records of mythology to have reference points to just kind of talk about this because let's see, I mean, if I'm to relate it to my life experiences that I've gone through recently, it's kind of felt like this process of like totally becoming something new and different. And you know, I can honestly see myself in Medusa in a sense. You know, you think you're someone else entirely, and then you have this like big traumatic experience and you become a completely different person, and you have something that's very hard to control and regulate, and you don't, necessarily mean to hurt people because you were once normal like them, but you have something now that makes you completely different, and then people see you in a different way. And honestly, with autoimmune diagnoses, I can feel this way sometimes. So I want to pull my mythic examples. I wanted this to be a very chill, very casual readjustment into ancient awakening, and also because like it's like podcast style type of thing, and sometimes things are not really organized, and I can't do things in the same methodology that I did things before, in the same method, because I'm different now, things are different now, so me getting back into the groove of doing things is going to be a bit different than before. So I don't even remember the journal prompts from 3 weeks ago. I will pull them up as well. So I'm trying to find references. So we're talking about the Gorgon representing the lower self. So I want to find myths of Perseus. I also want to find, say, Perseus and the Pegasus. I want to find when Medusa got turned into the Gorgon, like what caused that, and the Gorgon sisters as well. Um, yeah, let's see. So we have those saved. Let me see what the journal prompts were, so we can talk about them. I know this is so unorganized, and like for my like my perfectionist nature, I want to make this more organized and just like cut and start as if like everything's been fine. But I don't think that that's an accurate representation of how I've been feeling, and nor would that be an accurate representation of my work, is to just pretend everything has been fine. And like I haven't disappeared for like a whole month again, um, grieving the life that I had before. Um, so where's the last one? We're back with Persephone. Persephone. Let me see. We have the journal prompts from last time were, because last episode 22, we discussed Persephone as like a symbol of rebirth in the underworld, and honestly that felt a little bit more messy than this one in my mind when I was structuring it, because I did feel like I was forcing it. It wasn't like casually. Pulling from the cup is fun, okay? I'm not gonna lie, it's fun and it keeps me accountable and it helps me remember what I'm supposed to be doing in the next, video. But it's not always easy, um, because the ideas that I put into the cup were ideas I had a year ago, and they don't necessarily reflect what I am inspired by now. But the prompts from the last episode were, what underworld season have I recently experienced and what wisdom did it give me? Winter. Winter. Maybe fall. Winter. Winter. Spring. Nope, not spring. Winter. That's where I was for a month here. That's the answer. Where was I for a month? Winter. And I know, like, there's not many of you guys watching, and I do appreciate those of you that are, and I know that also most of you that are coming from the realm of inspiration as well, to join in this project, of diving into all of the deep metaphors that we can find within mythology and what they mean for us moving forward, as there is education being taught by ancient civilizations through the mythos, and anything that can help add to this deeper understanding of the mythos from all aspects of the ancient world to aid us in any areas of our lives are impactful for our mental health development, because it can show to us that what we experience in the modern day is not something that is new to humanity. For humans, we have been experiencing a lot of these things from before, and to have the metaphor of the seasons, and Persephone constantly going through a rebirth of the seasons actually shows a deeper, complex understanding that the ancient Greeks had of humans, potentially, because when you go through the winter season, this is the darker period of your life, and this is the period of your life where you are sort of struggling to understand who you are, and when you reach the spring season of your life, you are rebirthed anew. And I would definitely say, like, personally, while I finished uncovering this spiritual implication and metaphor within this myth, I started to go through this process myself, which is very fascinating, because to go through an experience of something that I didn't necessarily dive into this layer of the spiritual implication of the myth of Persephone, that it is the seasons of our mental health, but it's also like the process of grief. And when you're grieving something, when you see Persephone as the goddess of the underworld, clearly within her stories there is some guides and guidances with grief, and this it is very clear with grief you go through seasons. So you go through, the period of denial, which would be like the beginning of autumn. And then you start to go through the process of like trying to reach acceptance. Acceptance is summer, and I would say like the start of denial is autumn. You start to break out of the depression stage in the spring, but you definitely spend a bulk of the grieving time in autumn and in winter. Depression being the biggest one. Maybe acceptance could be spring, and then summer is like what happens after grief. So this like secret sixth stage, which is like living with the acceptance. And Demeter, technically in the myth, she does not accept the fact that Persephone is in the underworld. She technically she tries to prevent the consequences of Persephone's actions, but going through the stages of grief. And yeah, she bargained. Technically, maybe not the best example because she got her way, but it could be. I'm just thinking about this right now. This is actually maybe good to not have a full structure all the time, because what I'm thinking about now is that, so Demeter lost her child. Her child died. Let's see Demeter as just a human mother who is a farmer. And her child falls in a ditch and dies and is taken by Hades, right? And eats the fruit of the dead, is dead, and the mother goes into depression and bargains with God, Zeus, to have her daughter back. Zeus cannot give her, God cannot give her her daughter back in the physical because her daughter is dead. But what God can give Demeter is the ability to see and connect with her daughter in the harvest, to see her daughter's spirit in the crops, in the vegetation, in the land, and to help her manage and cope with the death. Demeter, I wouldn't say in like a psychosis, maybe that's not the right word, but Demeter envisions and sees maybe the spirit of her daughter returning to her. And because her daughter was so full of life, in the spring and in the summer, it is as if her daughter has returned. But when, the harvest happens and the crops die, it's like her daughter dies again. And so for Demeter, her child's life is associated with the life cycle of vegetation, changing with the seasons. This, honestly, feels like the root of that story in a different way. I was trying to think of the higher spiritual implication before, and it didn't feel 100% like the whole picture of Persephone. And now with like perspective from a few weeks, it makes sense. Because I'm gonna be honest, when I was like taking 2 weeks to just like try and script out everything, I wasn't doing as well because I was actually just procrastinating and avoiding. So that is never good. This actually feels a bit more clear. And then talking about the Gorgon and talking about Medusa, I wonder. And I do wonder. And because I've done readings of changelings, which is completely unrelated. Completely unrelated. But and I have done past life regression as well. And one thing that I've observed and seen through reading about the phenomenon of changelings and also through a past life regression is that children who developed autoimmunities or things that like now we would consider a disability, where their whole body changed, right? People saw them as, oh, it must be an evil fairy switching my child, and not seeing that their child is suffering something, because these things aren't new. It's not like autoimmunity was invented in the last century. It always existed, but we were not aware of it. That kind of makes me wonder about Medusa's change specifically, because it is so dramatic and it is so drastic. And like, I think of the one, I have diabetes and I have Hashimoto's thyroiditis, and I think of like when I was reading about the changelings, which is a completely different region of the world, um, completely different region of the world, um, but reading about them and seeing that like the symptom was like moods, like a shift in mood, shift in, them feeling hot, them feeling cold, like they're going crazy, right? These were illnesses that are treatable now, but were not treatable then. You know, when I was going into ketoacidosis, my whole body changed, right? Like I was losing weight. My hair like started to. I have like white strands of hair. Um, I had like an abnormal thirst. Yeah, back then they're gonna think that that's a spell, right? Being cast on someone, but that was a symptom of my body shutting down from lack of insulin. So, I do wonder if also at the same time, more than just the spiritual implications of the myths, but what also were they trying to process, something they didn't understand, and it manifested as a monster. So I think what I will do the next episode will be maybe not decided at the end of the current one, maybe, and it will be something with another monster, because I want to figure this out. What were they processing as well? Like what were they trying to make sense of? Not necessarily like the seasons, but of things with people, you know. So interesting. The second prompt from last week was, which part of my identity is ready to be released? So a new version of me can rise. I think just the old methodology of doing things. Like when I'm hearing the bugs buzzing around and the birds and observing nature in this moment, and I just feel like the structure that I was approaching was not in tandem with nature, was not in tandem with just like the flow of life in everything, not just with this podcast, but with my entire life, right? Like I started to get very unmotivated by everything because everything was uninspired. Everything was putting myself in a box, and you can't live. You can't live in a box. You can try, but it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable. And to essentially be neglecting your creative spark to try and fit some structure of something that just doesn't make any sense to you at all is denying and neglecting your soul. And that's the whole point of me of diving into the metaphors of these myths, is so we can acknowledge our soul, so we can awaken the ancient wisdom and truly understand how can it be applied to our lives. And we can't do that in the same like I was trying, I still am at times trying to tap into my ancestors and the philosophical way of speaking, and have everything structured and written down and very studious, very academic, very philosophical, because this is how we can explain things. But the thing is that's how they were explaining things then, and the point is to break apart how they were explaining things then and explain it in a way that makes sense to us now, so we can get a higher understanding of who we are as people now, and without having to put this layer of kind of like spicing it up, jazzing it up, just for the sake of doing so. Because we don't always need all these big words now. Like life is complicated enough as it is, and the thing is we have all of these resources, so we can translate it to how we see the world now. And the world now is not as like philosophical and profound necessarily. It is in a way more profound because we have become more complex as human beings, but it is not profound in the same ways as they saw life then, because again we have so many differences. So to be approaching, working with people, coaching people, making content in any form through the method of kind of doing things as in a sense of old school way, instead of trying to just like create something new, this has been very scary for me. Like, how do I just create something new? Because this is something that isn't always celebrated in the history of humanity and even in the mythos. Um, the creation of something new, but also the ushering in of change is celebrated. I think with the myth of Perseus and the Gorgons and slaying Medusa there, this change that happened was celebrated. Um, so I mean, also with the Heracles, the changes that he went through, the positive changes that he went through, were celebrated. And I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking like the curse of Hera on him, and I think of like now what we know about like schizophrenia or bipolar disorders or these things. Like in my mind, I'm also seeing it as the deeper possibility of like these were real people, and it's just the yayas and pupus sitting in the cafe and they're telling stories. Not that they had cafes like they have now, but telling stories about people that they know, and because we are very dramatic and creative people, adding this deeper twist to it. But then you try to understand something profound, and then to tell the story to kids, you add this deeper meaning behind the story, and I feel like they all have a root in something like real, for sure, that happened, real, that you witnessed, because I think of how I want to tell stories to people, and I want to pull from my life, I want to pull from human experiences, and I've written things where I've jazzed it up, and I've made it more profound and more philosophical and more in a way that can be entertaining, but also leaving behind an impact. And this is something, of course, I want to do, but understanding the time and place of doing that, and I could do that here, and I could create a myth on the spot and do that here, but that's not what is meant to be done. And what's very interesting is that when you actually like sit with your ideas, like I had the inspiration to do this, right? And I was sitting with it for a while, and sitting with what that means for me to for a long term on the internet be just like talking about myths and trying to find these deeper spiritual meanings. But when I and myself am still struggling with being autoimmune, and how that changes my view of spirituality, and how that changes my view of the world, and I have this different perspective. I have this different perspective that I am seeing life through now, which is changing things. It's changing a lot of things, and it's honestly forcing me to be a little bit more casual, because I don't have the energy to put myself in a precious little box. That's why I have my camera in a tree at a weird angle on a balcony, while I'm on a retreat from my daily routine, trying to come back to myself in a very casual manner, and it feels more inspired because it's not forced. You can't force innovation. You can't force inspiration. You can't force profound reflection. It has to flow. Everything is a flow. So what is the new pomegranate in my life? The moment or choice that transformed me forever. Diabetes. I'm on diabetes. I will say. For sure. For sure, diabetes. Because, oh wow, am I gonna start seeing everything through the lens of diabetes? I'm like thinking, oh well, okay, so she went after like the pomegranates, like she couldn't help it, right? And it killed her. And I just think about like one of the juices that I kept drinking pre-diagnosis was actually pomegranate juice. I was very, very, very thirsty. That's a symptom. The cotton tongue, the intense thirst, was a symptom of the ketoacidosis beginning. I'm filming this very early in the morning. Well, okay, 7 a.m. is not early, but it's early for me. early for me on a holiday. It is. So sorry for the yawning. But yes, I was drinking a lot of pomegranate juice. Actually, it's the main one that I was craving. Maybe like the antioxidants, because like I felt like there was something wrong with me, and I know that pomegranate has antioxidants, so like that's helpful. But also just like it was like the most like watery, but also I needed like glucose. But I didn't need glucose actually. It's just my body, because it didn't have insulin in it to turn the glucose into fuel, it was burning fat, and so there's a confusion of like I just needed fuel. And so now I'm seeing it from this perspective of wondering, um, is it possible? Is it possible? Because it, like, if I think about it from this, like, one of the last things, like, my mom would remember if I had gone into ketoacidosis and died was that I, like, couldn't stop eating and drinking liquids, that I couldn't stop eating fruit. Um, and it would have been the glucose because lack of insulin. So I wonder. I wonder of these things as well. It's understanding the metaphors and the myths. I want to understand the spiritual implications, but there is a different layer. There's a different layer that I didn't consider before, and this layer is also very fascinating to consider. Is like to consider that these are like people processing real experiences um, that they've gone through in their lives, or people in their lives have gone through. Sorry, I have photosensitivity, and the sun is like in my face. but but these real experiences that people went through, and then to process them, to tell them through story, and then to realize that there could be a lesson in this story, and jazz it up a bit, because every myth was word of mouth. And I really, really resonate with this theory, because like where I'm like looking at, like I'm seeing the blend of like the modern world. I'm seeing the blend of history, of ruins, and there is some, mythic history as well in the Peloponnese in general, the Peloponnesus. It's, there is so much very heavily. And I just think of the culture that endures, that survives. There is this other layer, and it feels like true, right? So to see it from that perspective, it makes me rethink everything. Everything. So, I want to see what I have for my mythic examples, for my catalog of myths that I've organized. So, the first, so we have Medusa in general. So, Medusa, she was a priestess before she got turned into a gorgon. She had a loss of innocence, and she was punished by Athena for being violated in her temple. This is the part that doesn't make sense, because they tried to make it seem like, and for Medusa specifically, I remember this when getting my Greek mythology certification, is that because of the Greco-Roman culture, Medusa's story, like the Gorgon story, is kind of on top of each other. Right? So there's like the myth of Medusa. There's like two Medusas. There's like the Roman Medusa and the Greek Medusa. So the Greek Medusa was violated by Poseidon, and Athena turned her into a gorgon as punishment for violating like the sacred rites of the priestess because of the actions that were done inside of Athena's temple. In the Roman, or is it the Roman version, we have the sisters, Medusa, Stheno, and Evreli, who are three Gorgon sisters, that when Medusa's head was slayed, that the Pegasus was born, right? This is just that she was born a Gorgon. Two different, two different Medusas, right? Medusa has just become very synonymous with Gorgon in general, but the Greek Medusa is the one that Athena transformed into. Now they try to like blend them together, and you can to say that like Medusa was a chosen sister of Sinitho and Evreli, and she went to the island that they were after she was turned into the Gorgon and joined their sisterhood, and then eventually was slayed by Perseus. This can and is the most like widely accepted interpretation of bridging the two. But when you actually study myth, they teach it as two separate things, and that we have tried to bring them together on their own, but it is two completely different myths. And this is why there is so much variation between. And this is also why I think that like it is deeply rooted in real experiences as well. And I know I've referenced this before. You know, like what if it's like a bunch of dudes named Apollo doing like a bunch of crazy things and you're just talking about it, and because like we're not like so creative with names sometimes, and we reuse names a lot, it's just like the same. Or it could have just been like because we like to name after the grandfather, like the first male, so it's like Evriani, you know, and one family all like behaves the exact same way, so it's like they're basically the same person. Like I've gone with this theory as well, with why they're so different, like from just like the cultural perspective as well, not just like academic, and it also is very fun to think of it from that way too. But and at the end of the day, they are myths, so we're never gonna know exactly the root to root reason why, and that's why it's so fascinating to like try and figure it out. So from the Medusa herself, we have Medusa was violated by Poseidon in Athena's temple. Athena punished her by turning her into a Gorgon. What I have as my little note here with this myth is that it is the psyche's response to trauma. The self becomes monstrous, not because it's evil, but because it has been wrongly blamed and exiled. So this, I have thought of this from before, that Athena is the goddess of wisdom, so she represents like the logical mind, and very much void of like the emotional depth behind things. You know, and I think of Athena and Artemis as a duality of each other in this sense, sort of. Even though in Artemis and Apollo, I would say that Apollo is more emotional, but because I think that Artemis represents the emotional perspective of going about a war and things, in a sense, because she's a huntress, so there is a strategy, but there is an emotional depth to it. With Athena, it is like purely logic, and when you're purely logic, like this is the way that things should be. Sometimes you're not as strategic as you think, and so that's the difference between like a warrior and a huntress. Like a huntress is going to understand the emotional motives of somebody, and of something, to take precise action. And the warrior is going to understand the general logic of something and the reason why something must be done, and the best general strategy of approach for all things. And that is how Athena is. And so if you have, oh my gosh, I think of an actual real life example. I don't know how personal I want to get. How can I be a little vague? But I had an experience that I wasn't entirely of my own choice, and because I was just like convinced to do, when someone like repeats something over and over again, and like very heavily coerces and encourages you to do something that's not necessarily something you would do if you weren't persuaded as much. And when you do the thing, you like start to feel guilty about it, and you start to feel like this is not me. And then for me, in this situation, I had a voice of someone who I had deemed in my mind to be the logical person, and the person who would very, very much judge me. And that in this person's eyes, I would be a monster for what I did, or I would be, not necessarily a monster, but I would be impure. And so, actually, when I think of it like this, you know, it's not Medusa's fault that she was violated. And it is a very sad study of humanity that for so long it was so widely accepted that this was the punishment. It was worthy of punishment. What happened? Because she must have persuaded Poseidon, right? This is the theory, which is not correct, but this is something we still, as women, are fighting with today. Like, you must have done something to deserve it. No, no, never. But because of stories like this, right? To kind of make it seem normal that it's our fault, right? Not good. Not good. What I also put was about the snakes. It was about the snakes. I put that the snake is a cleanser of the earth, spiritually they represent the kundalini, rising kundalini, the change, always shedding of the skin, and cleansing the earth of like bad things, right? They're energetically cleansing. They're cleansing the ley lines, and they eat pests as well. Yesterday I saw a snake, actually, coincidentally. So very fascinated, right? But also, in Medusa's case, what she needs to have cleansed, what she needs to let go of, is the rage that comes from being violated in such a way. Unfortunately, I have a similar experience in my life, and I remember the rage. And it's also how you see yourself. It's how you see yourself. And I like to think that, like, even though I have the Perseus myth, like, in my references in a different category, I like to think that it could be that maybe Perseus came into Medusa's life and showed her who she really was, and who she really was the Pegasus, right? And he helped her remove the facade of the, you know, external representation of the rage and shame, and maybe showed her that she didn't have to fight anymore, and she didn't have to hide her pain, and that she could still carry her innocence even though it was stolen from her. I do like to think of this as well, that there is this internalized shame that she carries, and that her turning into a Pegasus is her true form, is her true innocence, and that she could get it back by letting the anger go. And a lot of people in like spiritual communities, because I've looked and I've researched, see Medusa as a representation of the rage. And I've done like journal prompts and activities trying to release trapped rage that are inspired by Medusa. And, you know, what are you turning to stone because you're scared to process it? And, you know, these activities, we're kind of missing this layer of the Pegasus. So maybe I'll create one. Because this is the true form. This is her true form. Is this stable, pure, intelligent, elegant, free creature who is loved and adored by all, who isn't harmful but will protect themselves. And sometimes when we go through trauma, we try to protect ourselves by building walls and putting our guard up, like Medusa with the snakes, and turning people to stone to keep them away. Because really, it's her inside and her heart that has turned to stone, based on the experience that she went through, the trauma. Emotional paralysis I put under as my little note with Medusa's myth and the turning to stone, which makes sense. So the myth of the sisters, I have that Medusa was the violated one, Sanitha was the enraged one, and Evreli was the grief-stricken one. Sanitha was more aggressive. That and then can be the aspect of, I guess, like the lower self, the aggressive side. Medusa was shameful and punished. Punished by turning to stone. People forced to live with their shame, forced to live with their anger, forced to live with their uncontrolled minds of Rayleigh. The most uncontrolled part of self. To put it all together, it's the wounded self. Our lower self is our wounded self. In a sense. Maybe that's more shadow self. And maybe the Gorgon doesn't represent the lower self. The Gorgon represents the shadow self. Because the shadow self isn't here about the lower self is like that, the devil on your shoulder calling you to do bad things, right? But the shadow self isn't bad. It's just the parts of us that we haven't healed. And so the Gorgons represent the shadow self. I'm glad I have these little notes. Let's see. So I have noted that culturally in ancient Greece, they used the Gorgon's head to ward against evil, showing its dual nature. The Gorgon head itself, Athena ends up placing on her shield after Medusa dies. This is also very interesting. This is where I do love the theory that Athena turned Medusa into a Gorgon to protect her from ever being violated again, because why else would Athena then take the head of someone that she punished, like a priestess that she had punished, that she obviously saw as something horrible, and then use that head on her shield as protection? Like, why would she do that? But if she turned Medusa into the Gorgon to protect her from ever being violated again, and she turned into her final form of the Pegasus and was set free, then the head, the protective head, Athena can use to shield and protect others. This is the perspective I do like more as well. Yeah, that's kind of all I have to say with Perseus and my little explanation there. So in general, the Gorgon is the shadow self. It is not the lower self, because so it can be influenced by the lower self, right? The shadow self. So you have like the victimization that occurs where you kind of get trapped in being the victim, and the rage, trapped in rage, trapped in self-pity, trapped in paralysis of this frozen state, the numbness. And then eventually you use the knowledge to protect yourself, which also stages of grief. So denial of an experience, you get trapped in victimization. You are, yes, when you have a bad thing happen to you, you are a victim of that. But to be trapped in it is an act of the lower self. But the fact that you are the victim of that experience is the shadow self. That is something to be healed. The rumination on the victim self, that it becomes a mentality that you cannot let go of, that's the lower self. And Medusa wasn't necessarily stuck in being the victim. She turned into the Gorgon, but the root of like lashing out and turning people to stone, right? Trying to illogical protection. So then Medusa's head being given to Athena, being the representation of wisdom and logic, being the logical, informed protection. protection with purpose versus shutting everything out. The rage, the lower self likes to control via rage as well. Because anger traps us from seeing our truth. When we're stuck in anger, we're feeding all the lower emotions that prevent us from actually healing. But rage, anger itself is part of the shadow. It's not like an evil thing to be angry, but being trapped in wrath, that's deadly for the soul. The monstrosity, the shame, the self-pity that comes from a traumatic experience. Those feelings are normal, part of the shadow, but when you are controlled by them, it's the lower self. So, victimization would be denial. The rage, anger is a stage of grief. Either way. But also I could see it as bargaining. The depression would be the paralysis. I feel like bargaining is also in the rage in this case, because there's only 4 of them, not 5 stages of grief, but I feel like the anger and the bargaining are kind of in one in this case. And then protection is acceptance. So the final form, the Medusa takes as organized, structured protection. Because she went through the pain, she transmuted the pain, she stepped out of the shadow, and took her true form. It's very interesting. I think this makes sense. And I think it's also very interesting to take you in on the thought process that how my thought process is. Because I actually haven't sat with my thought process in such a long time when it comes to these things. And that's part of the fun, right? So then a journal prompt, I don't know, what can we affirm? What can we affirm? What do I have in my catalog? Let's see, Control F, affirmations. And then, let's see. I want affirmations to heal rage and to heal shame. So I face the parts of myself I once feared, and they become my strength. The pieces of me that were shamed or silenced now rise as, how can I relate it to Medusa? Now rise as protectors. Because I had it now rise and transmute themselves into something good. Like say rise into protectors. Rise as protectors. For shadow work, you try and find... My shadow is not the enemy. It is the doorway to my power. Shadow work. That's where I'm at. That's what I gotta do for myself. Coming out of Dark Night of the Soul. So journal prompts for shadow work. What do I have? How can I apply it? It's a Medusa. Let's see. See, I would like feeling paralyzed. When have I felt turned to stone? And what does that show me about myself? Like when have I felt turned to stone, and what does that show me about what I need to heal, right? What needs to be seen. Huh. What parts of myself have I labeled as a Gorgon, as a monster, that I'm shameful about? The paralysis, the shame. What parts of myself have I been shameful about that I label as monstrous and feeds that like victimization? What's the original core wound I'm trying to heal? How can I turn my pain into power? Yeah, how can I turn my pain into power? How can I see that the fears that I'm carrying are teaching me lessons? What lessons are in the fears that I carry? I'm going to polish these more, and they will be in the description. But this is my thought process of like, how can we really use and apply the lessons? But I feel like there should be other applications other than affirmations and journal prompts to apply the lessons. There should be more. I will figure it out. So for next week, as this is like very casually come to a close, for next week, I don't know what it will be. Something to do with the monsters. Will I be back to weekly? Will I be back to bi-weekly? I don't know. I think just whenever I'm able to get it done, I'll get it done. And we'll see, but maybe weekly again. If it's just casual like this, I don't have to stress, you know. Maybe another monster. Trying to understand the monsters. I think that might be what we're doing. Just like, I've done Cerberus, but I'm right now I'm thinking of the Manticore. I think of the Manticore. Next week will be the Manticore. What are the spiritual implications of the Manticore? I have no idea, but we're gonna find out together. So let's keep seeking ancient awakening together. Let's dive in to the wisdom that the ancient ones have left for us and try and understand the lessons that I'm sure that they wished that we would be able to figure out. And I wish you luck in your journey, and I hope that you can feel inspired in some way to really understand what brings peace and joy to your soul, and where you can find your clarity. I can find my clarity through Greek mythology and understanding it, and so I'm sharing it with all of you. But how do you find your clarity? What has been left from the past that helps you make sense of the present to inspire the future? Ponder this. In the next week, we'll discuss the Manticore. Until then, goodbye for now, and I wish you luck in your journey.